space so I can see you.
Cool. Very important.
Hi, patrons.
My patrons.
It's
Um,
RageCon.
Rage Con. It's vengeance.
Dude, I started getting a tattoo removed last week.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Gnarly. Gnarly, dude. It is the worst.
Wow.
It hurts just as much as everybody talks about. Like when people are like, "Oh, it hurts worse than getting the tattoo." Yes, that's true. Uh-huh. Uh-huh,
Wow.
100%. So,
Wow.
I mean, whoa, my my microphone arm just came off.
This is
Um,
now a portable microphone.
aha. Yeah, dude, it was like I go in and they were like, okay, so we started doing the consult and and this place was great because it explained all the science behind everything and whatnot. And I was
Oh,
like, this is cool. I like this. And she like sat down with me and she goes, okay, you ready? And I was like, what? She's like, are you ready for your first session? I was like, we're here. I guess I am. And so she brought me in this room and fired a laser into my fingers.
wow. Um, that sounds like fun.
Yeah, it was mere seconds, but it was the worst. It was
Wow.
like I was like, "Oh, I'm glad I don't have to like get I don't know tattoos removed from my fucking face or something, you know,
Or your dick.
or my dick." Oh my God, I'm so glad. First of all, I could never get my dick tattooed, but if I did, I would never get it removed. I'd be like, "That's fine, nobody will see it."
Fair point.
Yeah,
Fair point.
no thanks.
All right, ready to do this?
Yes.
Okay, I'll count us down. Three, two, one, go. Welcome to Why We Do What We Do. I am your retaliating host, Abraham.
And I am your so mad host, Shane. Oh,
We're a psychology podcast. We talk about the things that people do and the things that animals do, and sometimes we talk about philosophy. Sometimes we talk about diagnoses. Sometimes we talk about the ugliest of emotions, which will be what we talk
yes,
about today.
revengeance.
Revengeance. We're not we're not pre-vengers. We're avengers.
Uh-huh.
Um,
Yeah, and we've got a Hulk.
and we've
His
got a
name is
Hulk.
and his name is Justin, and he does all of our sound. So thank you, Justin, for that.
Ve- True story. True story. If you're joining us for the first time, welcome. We're so happy to have you here. We unpack all these psychological concepts. We try and do it in about less than an hour. Sometimes we go way over that. And as we said, we're talking about revenge today, vengeance. And if you're
Yes.
joining us for the first time, thank you so much. If you'd like to support the show, you can join us on Patreon, pick up some merch, leave a rating and review, tell a friend, do all those things. But first, I would like to wish you a happy Don't Step on a Bee Day.
Yeah, that would hurt. It's also International Nikola Tesla Day, which is
Would it
fun.
hurt? Would it hurt for you or the bee?
Probably both. Both. I don't want to be stung by a bee. I don't like being bee stung. It's not my favorite.
Understandable. It's just the bee getting back at you.
Yeah.
Um, it's National Kitten Day. Ooh,
Aw, that's
so
adorable.
yeah, that's
Um,
great.
I think that's great. It's National Pina Colada Day. Hope I never have to serve a pina colada again. I did that for like a summer and it was the worst.
Pina Colada Summer. Um,
Ugh.
it's Teddy Bears Picnic Day. I don't know what that means, but I'm assuming it's you include your teddy bears in a picnic and whatever.
Uh, sure.
Yeah,
That's my assumption. It's Pick Blueberries Day, which is delicious, and I love that.
very good. U.S. Energy Independence Day. So get on that grid, get off the other grids.
Yeah, it's funny to think that that's like a thing that they're celebrating because I mean, let's we're not really that independent from other energy resources.
No, we're
Um,
not.
nope. It is air conditioning appreciation days. As a Floridian myself, that is every day.
Yeah,
Because it is wildly hot down here right now.
yeah. As they're now having to update the maps for like what regions are considered to have what like rain and what types of regions they are because the climate is changing.
Uh-huh.
I think we can all get on board with air conditioning appreciate
Yeah,
air
for sure.
conditioning appreciation days.
Most definitely.
Um, so for some reason it is Be Nice to New Jersey week. So You get this week, New Jersey.
Yeah, that's it. That's it, Jersey. Um, it's Creative Maladjustment Day.
Is dog days of summer. Sure. I mean,
Sure.
why not? Why these days? Who knows? But that's what it is.
It's Freedom Week, so the week that this comes out, you've already maybe lost some limbs during Fourth of July, so
Yeah. Wasn't
maybe
that last
maybe that's
week?
what it is.
Was it last
Yeah,
week
that's
Freedom
last week.
Week?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Freedom to blow
That's
yourself
what it
up.
is. Yeah, exactly.
It is National Aborigines and Islanders Day Observance Committee Week. That's a lot of words.
There's so many words in that. We don't even really know what we're celebrating there. It's National Farriers Week.
Okay. It is Nude Recreation Weekend. Fun. Go back and listen to our episode on nudism.
Yeah. Oh, that was such a great episode too. That was so fun. Um, and then it is Operation Safe Driver Week. So
Excellent.
now it's funny to think that like maybe people are driving in the nude and
That's
in
safe
their
though.
car's AC.
That would have to be how that takes place. All
Yeah.
right. So anyway, we just like to celebrate those holidays because it's a thing that we can do, and part of what we like to boast is that we help you be better at trivia sometimes. So now you know what day of the week it is,
Yep.
if that comes up, and something, and maybe what week it is. And so there's that. If you're all caught up and everything, but as I said, we are talking about revenge, and the reason I wanted to talk about this is I think that there's been a lot of talk. I mean, I think this is a thing, first of all, that we as humans experience and do a lot of. And second, it feels like it's become increasingly relevant recently with just a lot of talk in the news about certain people who are talking about getting revenge. And so it had
Yes.
me thinking about revenge. It had me tend to or I guess, at a heightened awareness of other people talking about a revenge. And it's just kind of around us a lot, you know?
Yeah, and it's a thing that I think about a lot working in therapy because what I find is
That makes
that when I'm
sense.
working with families, and something goes wrong, then or like working with teachers or whoever, like I find a lot of people really want like there to be justice. Like it's this idea that like, oh no, the scales are not balanced. So I need to take it upon myself to balance the scales. And so I see this a lot on like low level, low magnitude types of forms.
Yeah.
Not to the point where it's like I'm gonna get back at them and make their life a living hell. Like it's nothing like that. But there is that low level of like having to balance the scales that people tend to have because they feel like stuff is off kilter because people quote unquote got away with stuff, and
Yeah.
so I see this a lot like in day-to-day discussions with folks.
That's a great point. And actually, I kind of think now I would like to do a whole episode on the concept of justice, which I mean is kind of there's a lot going to be a lot of overlap with our discussion today.
Yeah,
Although
yeah.
it does have its kind of unique history because obviously we have an entire system of government that is supposed to be dedicated to justice. Now it's just dedicated to political expediency, but it used to be
Sure.
justice.
Yeah,
Um, and
those were
uh,
the
and
days.
Uh, I mean, there's probably a brief window because like before that, it was just sort of also anyway. The concept of justice is a fascinating one, and there's thinking about something that's like what is being just, what is being fair, what is being forgiving, what is being compassionate, and I think those are kind of wrapped up in the idea of having a system of justice and what it means to get justice and what we feel like. But what we're actually tackling today specifically is this idea of revenge, which is inherently linked to that, right? It's this like I'm gonna get back at you thing.
Right, right. And so I think today what we're going to ask is what is revenge? What are the pros and cons of revenge? How does it affect us and why do we do it? Right?
That is
So,
the name of the show.
yeah, why it is that we do the things.
That's right. That's what I should have called it. I don't know why I picked
It
the
just
title
rolls
that
off
we
the
landed
tongue.
on. Yeah. All right. So let's actually start by telling a quick story here. So there's a story that I found that as I was pulling in some notes from this about this woman named Carla. She's at a stoplight. She gets rear-ended, and she gets out of her car. And the person that rear-ended her also get out of the car. And apparently there's some kind of exchange. They're yelling at each other. Like, you hit my car, and like, you stopped too fast or something, whatever. They're yelling at each other. Um, and uh, and essentially it escalates to at some point, the first the second girl, the one who did the rendering, slaps the first girl. Okay. So the first girl who already is now feels that she has been wronged by being rear-ended, that this was like
Uh-huh.
this person is now responsible for this, has now been slapped and is like, oh no, you didn't. And so it turns into a fist fight pretty quickly. But I mean, it's also over very quickly because what happened is, so Carla throws a punch at the person who rented her, whose name was Regina. This girl falls to the ground, and there's like onlookers, right? There's a screaming match. There's an accident, like people are watching, and so Carla is like punching and kicking this girl in the face and stomach who's like on the ground. Like she's beating this body that's basically laying there.
Right.
And so she's arrested for aggravated assault and says, quote, I wasn't going to let her get away with what she did to me, especially in front of that crowd, end quote. So
Ooh.
we hear this, and I think, at least for me, I'm hearing this is petty, stupid, prideful nonsense. I was like, oh yeah, like everyone's taking notes. Be like, let's get that girl's name and number. I want to be friends with her now. You know, like
Yeah.
what is your actual thinking? I don't know. I feel like there's no logic at all to that kind of reasoning. And it's really sad to hear that like it would even turn to that.
There is a version of me, Shane, that relates to this.
Yeah,
Historically. Yeah.
yeah,
Like there's a part of me where I'm like, "Oh, if this were Shane when he was 17, 18, 19 years old, then sure. Like I could see a fist fight ensuing, right? Like if
yeah,
but to be fair, if somebody threw a punch at me, then yes, I'm going to defend myself, right? Like I've had that I think about that version of me. Now, today I'm like, I don't want to fight anybody. Like what are we doing? We're adults here. So like, and kind of going like as like a mature, wiser wizard that I am, I kind of go, no, I don't relate to that as myself today. Like I can
right.
understand it, but I'm not that person. So but I think a lot of people who are listening and hear that story are probably going, yeah, I get it. I would do that, or that's me. Like there's like some level of relation to that, or at least that feeling
Yeah.
of wanting to get back at somebody.
Totally. Yeah, exactly right. Is I think that story will connect with a lot of people, even if it's not who they are now or like right in this moment, they could maybe see themselves in that situation and a similar thing.
Yeah.
And like, I know, yeah, exactly. For myself, at some point in my life, that maybe could have been me. But I've also been a pacifist for so long at this point that I also can't, like, it's harder for me to even imagine
Yeah,
reacting that
right.
way. You
Right.
know, like I'm not gonna start punching a kid. It like let's just say somehow I was so enraged that I even threw one punch. Once they're on the ground, I'm like, I'm not gonna be punching and kicking someone who's actually on the ground. Like, what's wrong
Right.
anyway? So let's normally when we start these kinds of discussions, we want to kick it off with talking about a definition, right? And that's because we need to distinguish our terms. We need to understand the parameters, what it includes, what it doesn't include. And that by itself can help us both illuminate that concept so that we're really clear about what we're talking about. But also it allows us to poke holes in that concept, which is a fun way to discuss
Yeah.
it. But rather than just give a definition, I'm going to do a little bit of walking backward through non-examples for just a minute. So bear with us because I think it helps actually underscore what revenge is by ruling out the things that it's not, by basically saying like let's start with just a piece of it and then expand it out until we get to what it includes and what it doesn't.
Right, exactly. So I think that we can intuitively understand what revenge is. I don't think that that's a difficult concept for people to understand, but I think where it gets difficult is distinguishing the use cases that can help not only pinpoint a good definition, but lay the foundation for how to start to understand this topic. So I think we like it's kind of like what pornography is, but it's hard to describe or define. Like that's kind of what revenge is. It's like what it is, but it might be a little bit hard to define without some more context.
Eventually, I think because of that quote, I'm just gonna do a mini on pornography. Like we need to
Yeah,
just do it. Yeah.
I think we probably just need to do a whole series on it because it's a whole thing.
That's fair, but just for the definition part. But
Yeah. Oh
anyway,
yeah.
so going back to revenge, let's start with no context, right? So we have person A does something to harm person B. That's all you get. Is that revenge? Maybe.
Well, yeah.
Yeah. Uh, what's immediately clear from that example is we need to know something more about the situation to be able to call it revenge. Just because person A harmed person B, I don't know. Maybe there's revenge. It's not clear. So that by itself is insufficient. We can't just say harm has happened, right?
Right. So then let's add a little bit of context. Imagine that we set an expectation for a child that they must put their toys away before going to bed. They don't put the toys away, so we take the toys away for a brief period of time and later return them. Is that, by definition, revenge? It sounds like an attempted punishment, but
Yeah.
you know,
I would think most people would hear that and think no, right? Like
right,
they're gonna hear like you take it, you basically told the kid this is the expectation. They don't do the thing, and then you take away the toys as a consequence because they're like, look,
right,
these have to be picked up. They're not picked up, they go away, and we'll bring them back later. But for now, they're lost. And
right,
like people are not thinking like, oh yeah, you really got that kid good, you know. Instead,
right.
it's like what was the intention of doing that? Okay, so let's go to a second scenario. Imagine we have an employee, maybe a coworker, maybe with a supervisor, whatever. They're constantly late to work, and after several instances of this, and let's say like egregiously late, they're like half an hour late, right?
Yeah.
After several instances of this, we're like, okay, we have to write you up. This is happening too much. Is the supervisor getting revenge?
Yeah, I mean, like you could see how it reads like that, but at the same time, it's like, you know, that's that blurry line of like, well, is this revenge? And there are people that will say, oh, that's just revenge. You're just trying to get me for whatever reason. Like you just don't like me and da da da. That's retaliation and all that fun stuff, right? I've heard employees that say stuff like that.
And often I think what you might say is then the employee might try to get revenge, but the write up in this case, it feels to me it's like, I mean, certainly it could be revenge, right? Like that could be what's going on here, but it also is like that's also what's going to happen in most employment
Right,
situations. If you're constantly like late, you're going to get in trouble. A
right,
write up might be the best thing that could happen to you in those circumstances, right? So
right,
I think it's just worth considering. Like maybe it could be revenge, but like by itself, it feels like that's not enough. And so I think what we have in here is there's often the temptation or the inclination to sort of conflate revenge with punishment. But
yes,
both of these examples that we've provided, they're looking at the punishment side of things, right? It's the we're trying to have some kind of consequence that decreases the likelihood of that behavior being a problem in the future. Um, but they're not really in what we're thinking of revenge. We're talking about people who are getting back at someone or getting their vengeance, right?
right. And I feel like, when we use these examples and it comes up, there's always that question of like whether or not somebody is trying to get back at you, like, or trying to get back at that person. Like one thing that comes up a lot is when ads play, it feels like somebody's trying to get back at us.
That was very good.
Thanks.
All right. Let's keep talking about revenge.
Yeah. So colloquially, I always have such a. You always write this in the notes, and I always have such a hard time saying this word. Colloquially speaking,
That was good.
hey, thanks. My mouth works sometimes. We tend to talk about punishment as a penalty for some violated expectation, in which the punishment is intended to teach something about the future behavior. But in both the scenarios that we just kind of referenced, the punishment may be, and also hopefully is, delivered without anger, right? Typically, when we're delivering a punishment based situation or like trying to impose some kind of outcome as a result of not following expectations, they're typically delivered without anger. When they are delivered with anger, it gets a little bit iffy.
Exactly right. Yeah, like if you imagine the parent is like yelling at they're like, "I'm taking your toys away." Like it's gonna feel maybe a bit more yucky and sort of on the revenge
Right.
spectrum of things. But they're like, "Oh, that was what happened. Like I told you, and if you're not gonna do it, then that's what happens." So I think oftentimes in this punishment, now punishment certainly can be delivered with anger, sure, and it can function that way. But oftentimes punishment is specifically calculated to be delivered in a specific way to have a specific outcome. It's like, okay, we're almost strategizing here. We want to prevent this thing from happening in the future. Let's like, what is going to be the outcome that we deliver that's going to have that effect?
Sure. Yeah, and often did you just
I did that
you
with
did this bullet
often.
point where it's okay.
Yeah.
All right. All right, cool. So of course, in both examples, they could be done as active revenge, but let's continue for a second. So maybe they were intended to cause harm. Okay, so like as an example, let's use a military sniper killing a target, murderer acting, or a murderer attacking a victim. Are these scenarios, these circumstances, are these considered revenge? I mean, as we start to unpack this, it's hard to say.
Right. So it's like, okay, if we just start, so we went the like punishment route. Okay, now let's just go. Someone's just doing harm to someone route. Like, okay, maybe what revenge is it is intentionally causing harm. I'm like, okay, well, military sniper killing a target. What it like they could feel bad about that, right? They could
Right,
have protest against that they've been assigned to do that thing. A murderer attacking a victim. It could be out of revenge, right? That could be why they did it, but it also might be for any other number of reasons that people do that sort of thing, I guess.
right,
So like by itself, it feels like it's insufficient to call it revenge. Like it could be, but not in most cases. And it must be, and I think that what that sort of highlights is it must mean that there's something about whether it is felt to be deserved harm, right? The recipient
right.
deserves that harm for something that they've done. So all right, so that's sort of I think we've done some good sort of stripping away like what it isn't. So let's step away from the what it isn't format, um, and start talking about I think just what else is entailed in trying to get the definition of revenge.
Right. So it's not just that they did something to deserve it. It's whether it is perceived as intention and if they have agency. So for basically what we're saying is like it gets even worse when the avenger, the person who is engaging in the vengeance type of behavior, engaging in the revenge, is feeling angry. So there is this kind of conversation around so much of it is implementing this stuff based on the fact that somebody else deserves it because they have wronged somebody and I'm angry about it.
Yeah, and so this part about the intention and agency is really important because let's say, for example, children. We tend not to try and get revenge on children. They often don't know any better.
Speak for
It's off.
yourself.
Yeah, fair.
I'm just
Um,
kidding. I love children.
they often don't know any better. Oftentimes it's just being reckless. Like we look at that and we think of probably not trying to get revenge. People with intellectual disabilities, where they like do something that's like this is not something that's normally acceptable, and not that it is acceptable, but we're not actually trying to get revenge on them. We understand that for their circumstance, there maybe was a lack of intentionality or like something there. So like the purveyor of retribution must perceive that it was done intentionally and, or recklessly, and therefore the recipient deserves it. So like they had intention, they had agency. Or like another one is often people who are significantly inebriated. They might do something, and although that can be really frustrating and really upsetting, unless it's vehicle related, most of the time, like people will sort of give them a bit of like, okay, I understand in most circumstances you wouldn't have done this, but in this
Right.
case you're inebriated. You shouldn't have been inebriated, and certainly not to the level that you were. So that's a problem. But like
Right.
you did something bad, we're not necessarily going to try and get revenge because we know that you were under the influence of whatever you were under the influence of, right? So, um, and then there's this whole aspect of the idea that like revenge seems warranted or like called for, and increasingly so as long as the action done is perceived as wrongful to the person now seeking the revenge, right? So they had to been harmed in a way that felt wrongful and unjust.
Right. Right. So this leads us to close to an official definition of this, right? So definition of revenge or vengeance would be to do harm to someone who is perceived to have done wrongful, unjust harm to us. And that is with intention and with agency, right? Like you just mentioned. We tend to
Yeah.
give people more grace and compassion when we feel like they are not in control of the behavior that is wrong. Like that doesn't necessarily excuse the behavior, but we tend to be like, oh, okay. Like it's just if you'd have done this under any other circumstances, we would be having a long conversation about this.
Yeah, exactly. So, and I think that's unique. That's kind of an interesting aspect of this is considering like under what condition does it happen? And it's kind of a very specific niche, but it's a kind of very specific niche of circumstances that happens a lot, right?
A
Um,
lot.
and so, like, I think we experience opportunities for thinking about revenge, even when it's not directly related to us throughout the day. And a good
Right.
example of this, too, is like we tell stories about revenge all the time. Stories throughout human history love revenge as a
Yes.
motive, as a theme. We were just talking before we hit record. John Wick, like this
Yep.
very popular movie series all about revenge.
Yeah. John Wick. What Monkey Man?
Monkey Man, yeah.
Is that was a newer one that came out. Like
Take
I
the Taken
there are.
movies.
Oh my God, taking movies. Yeah. Like I mean, the Avengers. Like
Yeah,
the like
the in the name.
the literal point of them getting together was to beat up Loki.
Yeah, yeah, is to get revenge.
Yeah.
Man on Fire was one. And then like many Shakespearean plays, Hamlet is in there. Like many Greek stories throughout time. It is a hugely popular motif to set up storytelling that people
Yeah.
resonate with the person who's getting revenge. Like
Yeah.
they're on the side of the venge seeker, right?
The comic book Deadly Class. Deadly Class is like an entire series that is dedicated to one person seeking revenge. Um,
Okay.
it's great. It's a great series, but it is one that's like, oh, here's another one. I think isn't Ninja Scrolls too like anime? Like there's all kinds of there's so much out there.
Okay.
Don't quote me on that because I'm not an anime aficionado.
Aficionado.
So
Jinx.
I don't want people to get mad at me. But I think Ninja Scrolls is like a revenge story.
Okay. I was actually just thinking as you started saying that, I think you could really say that the Dark Tower is a revenge story.
Oh my
Um,
God, yeah.
yeah. Yeah, like on both sides, like both your antagonists and your protagonists are
Uh-huh.
getting revenge against one another the whole time.
Forever.
Yeah.
Forever.
In an endless struggle of cycles of vengeance. So yeah,
Just let it go, you know? Just let it go. That's the actually, you know what's funny is now that you said that, the entire story is that, right? The moral of the story is just let it go.
yeah. Yeah. Ex
That's wild.
exactly.
That's great.
Yeah. And I think several Stephen King stories do that. And I think a lot of stories do that. Like it's not unique to him and at all. Like this is a very, very common thing that we see. And I think
Yeah.
also, as you said, like I think he has the underlying like we seek the revenge, but the moral is let it go. I think of the Green Mile is kind of a good example of that.
Yeah.
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 So anyway, there's a lot of like sort of pop culture type references and literary references, but the other thing to think about too is that like although we do have these stories, a lot of them are sort of the protagonist seeking revenge and we identify with them. We also have a lot of stories that talk about like the recipient of revenge and we identify with them instead. It's all in how the writer wants to tell the story. And I think there's very good examples of us having mixed interpretations of what we think about revenge in our culture. Sometimes revenge is good. We have the bad guys that get their comeuppance. The good guys get the bad guys, right? Is a sort of common way. But then we also have revenge as appearing bad. It can appear petty and childish and just spitefully mean, and
Yeah.
like inappropriate. And then sometimes it's kind of in this neutral gray zone. And I think that's very common when we're sort of telling historical narratives about two warring factions where they both feel aggrieved toward one another. And it just sort of seems like they're both trying to settle that grievance, but they're kind of going back and forth. And sometimes one's sort of getting a leg up and then the other. That kind of makes me think a little bit about Star Wars, although it's very clearly who the bad guys were in that. Um,
Yeah.
and
The
then there's this
Jedi.
other, yeah. uh, oh, got me there. Um, And then there's these moments in stories where we see our hero or a protagonist. Often they do this has an opportunity to exact their revenge, and then they avoid it. And then we see this as being like this almost saintly, very compassionate, very mature as sort of approach. But we could also see someone who had an opportunity to an someone who had an opportunity to get the revenge and didn't, and see that as being weak or cowardly and ineffectual. And so
Yeah.
it plays out a lot of different ways. This is really not a clear cut way that we sort of think about and talk about it in our storytelling.
Well, and I think there is something to be said too, like to the point of like sometimes we see it's good, sometimes we see it's bad, and I think it really depends on what side you're on of the moral argument, right? Like there's got to be because I think about it's the same mechanism, right? But when it's a bad guy getting their comeuppance, it's justice.
Yeah,
When it's somebody coming after me, and to intentionally harm me, then it's revenge. So I think there's also that framing device that changes the way that we perceive it and how much of it that we accept, not even just like how we enact it or how people enact it, but like what we will accept as reasonable, a reasonable response to a situation.
yeah,
Like, okay, this and there is like going back to somebody broke the law, they go to jail. Is that in itself revenge? Not necessarily. But then when you think of like the movie Death Sentence with Kevin Bacon, where if you've never seen that, his
I
son is
haven't.
killed by some gang members, and like during like a robbery, and he ends up the whole movie is a revenge movie where he is going and finding these gang members and killing them all. So it's a great movie, great movie. But it is one of those ones where you're like you're rooting for the guy who's literally murdering everybody,
Yeah, yeah,
and
like
we're going, that's good. And we're going, that's good. And it's like, nope, that's not good. That's a bad path to go down. But it's it's
yeah.
it's really how it's framed, because like you could frame that as going, he's just getting justice for his son's death.
When something you said that was so important and that you were sort of alluding to in that story is that like in real life, outside of stories and movies, everyone is the hero of their own story. I
Yeah.
think there are circumstances where it's pretty easy to say you're in the wrong. And there are people who will even admit I was in the wrong. But
Right.
a lot of the time, when we're in these situations where there's like a back and forth revenge seeking going on, both people think they're in the right. And honestly, if you were to consider that other person's perspective and what they're dealing with from your revenge, and then I think you start to understand like nobody's in the right here. There
Right.
is no right side of this. This is just, and sometimes like it's just a big complicated mess. Like maybe one person started the grievance, but then the other person, they followed it up with a revenge, and then they just go back and forth until they've both done so much harm to each other that it doesn't even matter where it started. They both did terrible things.
Right.
And the person who started it probably, again, it was not in bad faith. Like they probably did something that seemed like it was appropriate and justified to them at the time. And again, we're not trying to excuse bad behavior here, but I think oftentimes we get into these conflicts where they're totally unnecessary because both sides have done wrong, and
Right.
you just have to stop and break the cycle.
Right. Speaking of breaking the cycle, here's an ad.
I was hoping you just as soon as I said it, I was like, oh, that'd be a good place for an ad segue. You just read my
Uh-huh.
mind.
I got you.
Welcome back from that broken cycle. We'll reinstate cycle now. All right.
I like that.
So some other things sort of talking about here is in considering and understanding revenge is a lot of the research and science and I guess you could say observation, loosely speaking, has sort of classified what people tend to do in the revenge seeking, and I think that does help illustrate what we're talking about here and why it matters.
Right. So people tend to exact revenge more when there is less of an opportunity or less of a likelihood that the recipient of said revenge will actually seek further revenge against them. Basically, what this is saying is people are more likely to get revenge if there's no return on that
Right.
revenge. Like
Yeah.
you are not going to get back at me if I know that if I act on this, this is going to be the end of it. People are more
Right.
likely to do it.
Yeah. So often there's an imbalance of dynamics here. So they're more likely to try and get revenge when they're larger, stronger, they have more physical or metaphorical power. They've got better weapons or better defenses. So, like in the example you said of like when you're 17 years old, like someone rear ends you and you guys get out, that person slaps you in the face. Let's also say that they're standing at like 7'6". They weigh 200 pounds and or 300 pounds and they're a professional boxer. Like, are you going to try and get revenge on them for that slap?
No. But I would like at that time I would have left them with something that would have made them question everything. Like I would have like dropped some psychological bomb on them somewhere. Because that's the kind of revenge I like, is the one that's like a deep-seated, like it stays with you forever. Yeah.
You should plant a little nugget that has them question reality. Yeah.
Uh-huh. Yeah, yeah, it's great. That's my favorite.
Yeah. So yeah, like they're not gonna do when there's an imbalance in that, and there's a high likelihood that if you try and get revenge, they're gonna get revenge back. People tend
Yeah.
not to try and get revenge, and so it's like again, now this is illustrating that like revenge is the big guy picking on the little guy, and like is that who
Yeah.
you want to be?
Right. Yeah, and also like I also don't want to be revenged. You know,
Very
like
much, yeah,
I don't want to I don't want to do that, and I don't want to be revenged. So, and the thing is people tend to seek to inflict harm at as least as great as the original offense, if not greater. So like at least at that level. So when people go to get revenge, it's that, again, I kind of mentioned at the top of the show, where it's that balance is off, so they're trying to rebalance the scales. So it's
right,
like it has to be tit for tat, eye for an eye type of situation. Like, oh, you did this, so here's equal and swift response to that situation,
yeah,
or more. Like
or
it's either
more,
like you're gonna get it, or I'm gonna make this so bad for you that you'll never do this again.
yeah, avenge sevenfold. Um,
Nice.
And then just thinking about like where revenge takes place, oftentimes revenge will happen in existing relationships. And I think it's because when you have a close relationship with someone, both people are a little bit more vulnerable to one another, which means they're a little bit more vulnerable to potential harms or interpretations of slights or wrongs or whatnot. But
Right.
of course, this can happen between total strangers, as in our story at the top of the episode. And it can even happen between nations of people and leaders. And it does seem like that social aspect can really complicate the dynamic of that.
Right. And so the neurology studies that we were able to look at, neurology studies report that people tend to expect a feeling of reward and satisfaction when planning revenge. So like as
Yes.
we're getting it together, like, Macaulay Culkin is doing his battle plans for the trap houses that he's working in. And like
Yeah.
he's like, yeah, I'm gonna get back at these guys for being mean. Take that, Marv. Like there is like a level of like reward and satisfaction that is expected while you're kind of going through the plotting stages.
Right. Yeah. Oh, excuse me. Now, although often revenge is kind of reactionary, revenge might be a quick response to some perceived slight or transgression. Obviously, you can think of revenge as plotted and sort of planned out for a really long time. And I think there have been actual stories of people who waited, like 3 decades, and then they got back at someone 3 decades later. They planning their revenge the whole entire time. Count of Monte Cristo. That I mean, that's obviously a
Uh-huh.
fictional story, but that's the basic idea in there. He's like spends years and years and years building his revenge, and then once he amasses enough wealth and power, just goes around just destroying the lives of every person who was responsible for imprisoning him and ruining his life.
That is that's the path I'm on right now. So
Okay.
if you are somebody who has harmed me and you're listening to the show, just you wait.
Chin's got his little
I'm
black
just
book.
kidding. I don't I genuinely don't genuinely don't have the energy for that. Like I that's something I was like, as we're kind of going through this, I'm like I don't even have like the like I don't have the mental capacity right now to even consider revenge on somebody, let alone the time and the response effort. I just can't do it.
We're getting too old for this shit.
We're getting too old for revenge. I don't know. I'm just, I just can't. So let's talk a little bit about the pros and cons of revenge, which, is funny to think like,
Let's.
what are the pros of revenge?
Right.
So for, as a general rule, these are some benefits that are discussed around this. First, might be that the revenge is rightly justified, or it could be politically expedient, right? The idea is like there's some benefit in that you're going to get what you want out of that situation because it was justified, it was helpful from a political standpoint, it's doing something to benefit you in that moment.
It feels justified at least. It feels sort of
Yeah,
righteous, right? Yeah,
right.
like maybe it is not actually. Well, anyway, that'd be a sort of values discussion. Um,
Sure.
another potential benefit here, and I heavy emphasis on the word potential, is it may create a sense of restoring the balance of suffering, which balance of suffering
Meow,
might be
meow,
good.
meow.
Is this a band name, an album name, a song name at least?
Oh, for sure. That sounds like a
Okay,
Black Dahlia murder
that
record.
does. Yeah. So that's like that could be considered a benefit if it works that way. Is this sort of it levels the scales as you were as you've said multiple times now.
Yeah. Equity theory actually states that people feel distressed when they feel like they've been treated unfairly. So if something has happened to you and you feel like you've been treated poorly, then yes, this is something that will you'll feel some distress around that. And revenge may actually serve to alleviate that distress by making the situation more fair. By kind of like going back and going, okay, well now this feels fair because it was not fair before.
And so all that is to say, when you sort of put that all together, that getting revenge may have someone feel better about the situation. That's a purported potential benefit of getting revenge.
Right. But there are drawbacks, obviously. So first, it tends to perpetuate an endless cycle of retaliation. I mean, all you got to do is look at the Hatfields and the McCoys.
Spanning generations, yep.
Yeah, like for real. It was like, you murdered my uncle, I'm going to murder your uncle. And then it just went on like that for many, many, many decades.
Yeah, I mean, and that is exactly one of the biggest problems with this. It almost always results in a back and forth for not almost always. There are lots of instances where it's kind of a one-off. Something does something, someone does something else, but it can quite easily lead to this just ongoing, perpetual, like you get back at me, I get back at you for getting back at me, then you get back at me for getting back at you for getting back at me, and it just goes on and on.
Right.
Another one is that this is an important one, I think. So the Avenger tends to feel because they've exacted their revenge, the tendency that they've reported is that they actually tend to feel an increased sense of fear that they're going to then receive additional retaliation from the recipient of the revenge, and that they can actually that fear can persist for a long time. So it's like even if they had an immediate like burst of yes, I got back at them, then they it turns pretty quickly into what if they try and get back at me, and or
Yeah.
someone related to them or in their circle does, right? And so like now I'm kind of on a bunch of people's hit list, and so now I'm kind of now I need to watch my back and just be constantly on the lookout, and that fear just sort of carries out for a long time.
Yeah. Another thing too is the Avenger tends to think about the situation and think about the revenge, and they experience aversive emotions for longer. So, as I was reading that, and thinking about that, I was thinking of the scene in Endgame, Avengers Endgame, where Scarlet Witch says, "You took everything from me," and Thanos says, "I don't even know who you are."
Yeah,
Like, if that doesn't tell you how revenge is so powerful, like
yeah,
she was like thinking about this forever, and he's like, nah, I don't even. I mean, it was like it didn't even impact him. Like it wasn't even on his register. So like the
right.
person who was avenging Scarlet Witch was like having all of this emotion around this, and Thanos didn't even
For a
like it
long
out.
time. Yeah, just carried it
Yeah,
with her.
yeah,
Um, another I think pretty clear drawback to revenge is that it because we talked about how it can happen in like interpersonal relationships with people that you know. It can pretty quickly damage those relationships, often beyond repair. Like it can now sometimes there's sort of a dynamic in relationships where it's just a lot of back and forth going at each other, and that just persists for a
Right.
long time and it kind of works. But when it turns into like a cycle of revenge, and particularly if it escalates, which those things can do, like it gets to a point where it's like that maybe was once a valuable relationship is now both a source of distress, fear, frustration, anger, and like misery. And it just continues to get worse and worse over time. And it's like now that person who was once a friend is now like a bitter enemy. And like, so
Right.
that happens, that can happen because of revenge.
Right. Yeah, it's real, it's just it's bad. So and another drawback we would argue is that rather than being cathartic, it tends to feel to keep feelings of the injury present for longer. Like so it just kind of festers and doesn't really get better. Like it doesn't like now I've resolved the situation, now what? Because you spent and also you spent so much time planning and plotting your revenge and having that feeling around it, like you're still going to have the feelings about that situation. Like it doesn't
Yeah.
make you feel better that you hurt somebody else. Very rarely does that happen. So there is that experience around that too.
And very often I can talk. We come to regret those vengeful acts. Like it's in the moment, we're all heated, we're all worked up, we're escalated, and we go and inflict our revenge. And after a while, we kind of have to sit with that and feel like, "Ugh, I wish I hadn't done that." And like the damage is done. You can't undo it. There's no control Z
Right.
for this. It is just um you just have to live with that now, and then it's something you regret. So it's like try and act less impulsively.
Right. That's what I'm saying. Like just don't do it. Like just to try to like get that under control. Get that under control. And I think at the end of the day, like it can escalate the conflict. It can make things way worse because you're just kind of again perpetuating that cycle of back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And as a result of that, like not only do you end up getting hurt and the person that you're trying to hurt gets hurt, but people around you get hurt. I mean, I think genuinely the Hatfields and McCoys, like now that I've brought that up, now that's all I can think about as far as like the
Yeah.
revenge tale goes, because
Yeah.
so many members of the family ended up getting killed as a result of that back and forth between two people. It started with
I
two people and it just turned into a family affair.
yeah. I ran into several stories that talked about there being some countries where like some people in power have blood feuds that have been going on for generations, where they're basically killing off, you know, groups of people, maybe families, or some group of people that they're killing off members that have just been gone on for decades. That they've
Right.
been keeping it going. So, I talked a long time about that show, that TV show Hunters, and the whole premise of that show was it was mostly Jewish people. I think it was mostly. I think there were some people who weren't in like the 1960s. I think who were hunting down ex-Nazis
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
killing them. And like that was the whole show. Like the whole premise is sort of John Wick-ish in that sense, right? The Nazis who
Right.
survived, who were sort of out and about, they were hunting them down. Particularly those who were like practice, continuing to be Nazis, but also
Right.
just
Right.
yeah. So anyway, yeah, the whole like as you said, like it can escalate, and it just gets worse and worse and worse, and the conflict grows more and more severe. So that's also one of the major drawbacks. And a major drawback to like having a podcast is having to play ads.
Oh, shucks.
All right, let's get back to it. We're in our home stretch here, I think.
Yeah, so let's ask the question why? Why do we revenge how we revenge? And there is the question I've kind of mentioned a couple times is that there is, some folks want to restore balance. They might feel like the scales are unfairly tipped and so they've got to do that. Or what they want to do is they want to deter future behavior, right? So it's like I've got a big stick and I'm going to swing it, right? The idea that like, okay, you got
Yeah.
back at me, I'm going to get back at you so bad that you're never going to want to do this again. But this is never born out of observation or research. Like people will just often overdo revenge. So it's not balanced. So they actually tip the scales the other way. And even if it is equated, people will typically not report feeling fair or balanced afterwards. So like even when they do get revenge, it doesn't work the way that they think it will.
Um, it's a very silly typo there. Um, yeah, so like yeah, the it doesn't seem to actually restore balance. And another one we mentioned is that people will say, "Oh, I want to deter future problem behavior from occurring again." Like that's why to get revenge, right? Well, the thing is like that doesn't seem to hold up. Deterrence seems to fail because again, it tends to escalate and prolong the conflict and
Right.
invite further retribution. So and I think this is not something that is lost on people because they walk around in fear. People tend to expect further retribution when they've been vengeful, right?
Right.
But they are much, and they've actually done research on this where not only do they expect more, they're more fearful and they expect retaliation when they've exacted their revenge, but when they have not been vengeful, they are much less likely to expect any further aggression from the original transgressor. Um,
Right.
uh, again, if they had not been vengeful. And then another reason that it seems like deterrence is not really true and not really an actual motive for what's going on here is because in these studies, when people have been given an opportunity to seek revenge on a stranger they'd never see again, they were much more likely to try and exact revenge, and they were more likely to do it more severely. So they never even have a chance to see if the deterrence worked, right?
Right.
And so it's like it's actually pretty clear it's not ever being used as a deterrent, not really. It seems like the deterrence rationalization is sort of a post hoc excuse for sort of saying like I was angry, I was escalated, I wanted to get back at the person, and then to justify that, I'm like, well, this will prevent them from doing that again in the future, even
Right.
though we know that it won't. You're more likely to do it if you think you can get away with it and not have retribution. And it tends to, and in most circumstances, it tends to escalate. And most people kind of know that that can happen too. So, like, deterrence is kind of, it's just a myth.
Right. It's yeah, it's an excuse. I mean, it's an excuse. Now,
Oh,
um,
Ender's
re-
Game. That was what I was thinking of when I was thinking about this deterrence thing.
yeah.
Because in Ender's Game, he kind of has this whole spiel about like, even though he's feeling like he's not that violent of a person, he's like when he was getting bullied, he's like, I have to put that person down so that they can't hit back. And that was part of what has them select him as like sort of the leader of things
Yeah.
is like, we want this kid because his rationale is end any future threat. And so they're like, answer genocide.
Yeah. Ugh. What a wild book.
Yeah.
Um, it's I mean, great. It's a great book, but it's
Yeah.
that series is
It's
interesting.
dark. It's
It's
dark.
dark. Yeah. And it doesn't really get lighter as you go through the rest
No,
of the series.
it's
Nope.
weirder.
Weirder, yeah, for sure. Now, revenge generally happens in the context of an angry emotion. And so anger is often a key part, if not central to revenge. And that in itself is a pretty significant driver for people. When people are angry, they tend to want to do things, and maybe they don't think about the outcomes of those things and whatnot. But when people are angry, they tend to do a lot of things. And that in itself, that burns out very quickly. If you want to kind of use the idea of like emotion as like a motivation and stuff like that. But
Yeah.
basically like emotion is so fluid, and like when you read stuff like on ACT, and they kind of talk about the idea that like emotions are really more like visitors
Mhm.
that kind of like magnify certain motivations at a time. Anger is one that's like a quick visitor that magnifies the need for revenge, and then it goes away, and then you get revenge, and then you're left with the fallout and no anger from that situation, or maybe some like resentment or whatever. There's a lot of kind of weird
Yeah.
stuff to unpack inside of that.
Yeah. Very much so. Another thing that happens with revenge is there can be a very important and significant social component. Like, what will people think if I don't retaliate? I think I see this a lot in politics, right?
Yes.
And there's this sort of like, I have to look like I'm taking action, otherwise people will think I'm weak, or they'll think I'm ineffectual, or they'll think, I can't handle this, or they'll basically say like, you need to get back at this person or entity or group of people or whatever. And so I think there's a social component of not wanting to appear not wanting to feel embarrassed, not wanting to wanting to avoid the embarrassment, not wanting to appear weak. That with those things, I'm kind of like, honestly, in my mind, fuck what people think, right? Like
Right.
that really is not when the difference is like someone's life is on the line or someone's going to be mad at me. I'll take someone being mad at me, right?
Right.
Like, and again, it
Right.
is a values thing. It's a big values thing. But like, the other thing too is just thinking about like it does escalate and all that. So it's like, am I willing to risk escalating the situation so I don't look bad? And I think most people, not most, but I've seen it happen a lot in very public forums.
Right. Right. Exactly. And I think it's unfortunate because people care so much about how they're perceived that
Yeah,
they because it serves as a detriment.
yeah,
Now, I think one of the more interesting things that came out of this is that people who enjoy, like, they self-report enjoying hurting people, also tend to report supporting revenge-seeking behavior. So, what does that say
yeah,
about revenge? Do you want to be in that group? Do you want to be in the
yeah.
group of people that like are totally good and think it's okay and actually really enjoy hurting other people? Because that's the people that are like, they're the revenge approvers.
Yeah, yeah. You go to a party and you meet a person and you say, "What do you like to do?" I like to hurt people. You're like,
I
"Oh,
like your
let's be
revenge.
friends." Yeah, I want to be friends with you. You like to hurt people. Um, like
Right.
you don't want to be in that camp. Like people who report enjoying hurting people are psychopaths, right? Like,
Right.
and that's a very loaded thing to even say on a show like this. And I think we need to address psychopathy at some point in the future. But I think speaking more loosely and off the cuff of like that shouldn't be your idol, you know,
Right.
like let's not aspire to that.
Yeah, it's bad news.
So there's also whenever anything happens that humans do, they're like, why did we evolve this? And I mean, on the one hand, I can understand we're obviously doing it, so it was a product of evolution in one capacity or another. But there's one thing about this is that biologically, this is not entirely unique to humans. There are many
Right.
examples of animals who have attacked other animals when those animals stole their food. There's like hyenas stole a kill from some lions, so the lions killed the hyenas. And it's like,
Right.
what were they seeking revenge? We don't know, but it does seem like there was like a really targeted "I'm going after you after you took my food" type of thing. And most of the examples that I came across were food related. And then there was an interesting one too with rhesus monkeys, where if one member of the group found food and didn't share that food with a group or like alert that group to the food, and they found out, then they would like beat up that monkey.
Oh,
So yeah, so there was like some amount of revenge there. So under what aspect of this is biological? I mean, obviously we have the capacity for it, so there's that.
right, right. Now, this was when it comes to revenge, it's almost certainly cultural too. When we really get into it, possibly a deterrent at first for those who would selfishly attack others to take resources. Eliminating the threat of people trying to take from others would result in equitable access to those resources for people in the group, or else lost resources by all. Like we've got the situation where all the stuff could happen, but at the end of the day, it doesn't really serve as a deterrent. It doesn't prevent like revenge doesn't prevent because revenge occurs after something has happened, right? So like
Yeah.
so it's like kind of it's weird to look at it like that, but if we get rid of a threat, then we keep our resources and that makes sense from that perspective. But at the end of the day, like it's still hurting other people.
Yeah, I think the idea with talking about this aspect of it being cultural is thinking about sort of end of the world type setups, mostly zombie movies like or shows, or Walking Dead and Last of Us, that sort of thing. Is let's say you're living in that situation and there's like a group of marauders who are going around basically attacking people, stealing their stuff, burning down their walls and whatnot. And then people seek revenge against them. They jail them or maybe even kill them. And then those people are no longer out attacking and killing and burning things down. What you've done in that case is you've essentially secured your resources and your people against that potential threat. So
Right.
what the idea here is that like this could have if this almost certainly evolved culturally back way back in time when cultures were starting to form and tribes were coming together, and there were certain people or other smaller tribes that were running around basically looting from other existing tribes, and then they were like, we got to stop this from happening anymore. And so
Right.
that there's a suggestion essentially that that's how that kind of came to be.
That makes sense.
There also another thing that sort of speaks to the cultural aspect of this is that the sort of acceptability of revenge and the motives for revenge, they tend to vary across cultures. So you can find different uh I guess approaches to revenge in if you go to different countries. And so for one example, they did this study where they were I think they were just surveying people, and Americans were more likely to seek revenge if they felt that their individual rights or liberties were threatened or were removed.
Right.
And alternatively, Koreans were more likely to seek revenge for duty-based harm, so related to their obligations and their work, and what they were sort of allowed to do. And also, there was a huge component of like um, social aspect of revenge there. So
Right.
that I think again further speaks to the fact that the motives for revenge are different in different places and considered acceptable under different circumstances, alludes to the idea that uh, the culture plays a significant role in how this is shaped up.
Oh, most definitely. And I think, at the end of the day, when we start talking about kind of the behavior surrounding revenge and the experience of revenge and all that, I mean, it's absolutely learned, right? So there's this really great quote about this that says, "quote Children are not born with hate in their hearts; they must be taught it." Right. And I think that that is so critically important for understanding how any of this works and how we operate as humans in that space.
So this is a quote from the TV show Ghosts that I've recommended before on here. And so they
Yeah.
have this Viking character who tends to avoid using be verbs. So he says, "Children not born with hate in their hearts, they must be taught it." And it's played up for a joke because basically what happened is he wanted his son to hate Danes. But he
Yeah.
died before his son grew up, and then his son grew up and married a Dane, and so he was like originally mad about it. And then he was like, well, it's not his fault. I wasn't there to teach him to hate Danes, is sort of how the joke goes.
Sure.
Um, and so, but I was like, it's such, in my mind, I was like, what an incredibly profound quote to use as a joke for this, because it's
Right.
absolutely correct. Like, yeah, children are not born with hate. They're taught the hate. So when that develops, it's because it's been taught. And I think that we should look around at each other and be like, let's be ashamed of the fact that we've done this to this kid
Right.
and maybe be ashamed of the fact that we have to depend on ads.
Oh, I was like, we're right at that mark. I wasn't sure if you had something. That was good.
Yeah. Okay, we're at our very last thing here. Just I think unpacking just as a slightly different angle to take and understanding revenge.
Yeah, so let's talk about the behavioral part of this. Now, behavior itself can be reinforced by relief, right? The idea that somebody else's behavior is stopping, somebody else's behavior that I dislike is
Yeah.
stopping, right? And the individual caused the stop. So, like as me myself, I have caused the stop. And there might have been this idea of signs of damage, like the idea that like not only do I get this behavior to stop, but like I actually like seeing this person suffer. And
Yeah.
that is it, for our folks that agree that they enjoy hurting other people, that signs of damage piece is fair game to consider. And for those of you
Right.
who are not familiar, signs of damage simply means that another organism will enact harm on another organism just because they enjoy the result of the harm. It could be blood, it could be pain on the face, wincing, crying, the actual damage itself. Like all of that's kind of what signs of damage means.
Yeah, and it actually it can be damage to inanimate objects as well. But
Yes.
yeah, the reinforcer, like the consequence they're working toward, or the thing that works to maintain that behavior, is that they got to see damage done. And that I think is
Right.
sort of a behavioral way of unpacking like what is revenge. It is behavior that is reinforced when someone else's behavior stops. So you got someone to stop doing what they were doing, And so that is a reward. And you specifically were the one who caused that thing to stop. And when you did that, you were able to observe some signs of damage. You caused
Yeah.
some damage that was clearly observable. Um,
We call that multiple control.
And so I think that's just a way of the thinking about it from like if we strip out like anything from intention, anything from motives, anything from anything else, what we can look at that is pretty empirically and objectively observable is that aspect of it. And that just again I think
Right.
helps clarify ways that like how would we measure this if we were just watching and we didn't have context if we knew those things, right?
Right.
So I just think it's useful to think about that in that way sometimes. Another one we've talked about is this idea that the act of revenge can result in like this long-term persistence in our thoughts and emotions of anger, of the whatever the if the original injury was, the last retaliatory injury was. And I think it's helpful to look at this as a verb, right? So we're going to go back to revenge is not a thing really, it's like an abstract noun, but when it turned into a verb, avenging, right?
Right.
And when we think of this as an action, every time we take an action, that's a behavior. And when we do that, it strengthens that action in our psychological past and present. It's in our repertoire, right? It's there. The more we do
Right.
it, the more we're likely to continue to do it, particularly if it works in some way. And it just goes back to this endless cycle. The mathematical equation, violence equals violence.
Yeah.
And it just goes on forever. There's no additional solution to it. And so at some point we've got to change what the other side of the equation is if we want it to stop repeating.
Right, exactly. And another thing to think about too is it makes sense that we would, as an organism, try to minimize harm to ourselves. Like, this is just from a basic survival standpoint. Like, I don't want harm to come to me because if harm comes to me, then I will not survive. Right. And so we can not only just engage in this behavior, this revenge behavior for our own survival, but we also will do it because we can get away with it. And there is that piece too, where it's like, okay, I've been harmed. I'm going to get away with this by enacting revenge on somebody else. And so there is like this component of it makes sense that from a self-preservation standpoint, it makes sense from a reward standpoint. I can get away with it. I get relief from doing this. There's all kinds of things that play a role in this. And so all of those contingencies make sense for why somebody would do this.
So I think we're sort of getting to what I would think of as sort of a take home here. And I think one of the big take homes for understanding this is like the problem with revenge is it doesn't do any of the things that it promises to do. It doesn't work as a deterrent. It doesn't work to make us feel better. As a matter of fact, it often makes us feel worse for longer, or at least continue to feel bad
Right.
for longer. And it doesn't work to restore balance. Like it doesn't work. It doesn't do anything. It just fails spectacularly at everything it says that it's trying to do, and it makes things significantly worse.
That's exactly what I was going to say. It's like not only does it fail to resolve the issue, it makes things worse. It makes things worse by escalating conflicts, by causing distress and anxiety, by injuring relationships, and all of those things. And then you live not only with the fact that you had to commit this act of revenge, but now you have to live in fear after the fact because you don't know if you're going to get revenged on. Like you might get revenged. Which is like I think I like saying that. I don't like saying be the victim of. I like you got revenged.
You got
You
revenged.
know?
I like it. I think that's great.
Yeah,
Matter of fact, I personally think we should turn all of our past tense verbs into just add ed to the end. Like I drove
yeah,
to work today.
yeah.
Just make
I'm
English. It'll make a
big
little bit more
fan.
sense. Yeah.
Yeah, big fan.
All right. So thinking about this, we've sort of already been espousing this, but what can we do about this? I think, I mean, we as a podcast, nothing. We can tell you what we think, and
Sure.
maybe you'll listen to us. But I mean, you're here with us now, so thank you. But in terms of us as a species, we can end the cycle by doing things that are kind of obvious, right? Instead of getting revenge, we practice forgiveness. By
Right.
considering the perspective of the other person, we can try and put ourselves in their shoes and understand where they're coming from in these things. And again, never to justify when people do bad things, and people are going to do bad things, and we want a system that deals with that appropriately. But the system shouldn't be Hammurabi's code, you looked at me sideways, so I chopped off your arm. You called me a bad word, so I hung your whole family. Like that is not the way to go. And
No,
so
not at all.
instead, it's really just considering the perspective, understanding where they're coming from when it makes sense to do so, trying to bring some level of compassion to this.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's the best possible endpoint. Like, I think that it doesn't serve anybody anything. Like, it really truly is the worst. It really truly is the worst kind of way to go about resolving a conflict. Like, it is because ultimately what you're talking about is there is a conflict in place, right? And so your response is to go bigger, go harder, scare this person, hurt this person, and that solves none of the problem, because the problem has still existed. It will continue to exist. And now you're left with, not only do I have the original problem, but now I've created more problem. Like, it just does nothing but fuel the fire.
Another thing that we can do about it is practicing mindfulness. There's actually been some experimental research that's shown that when people practice mindfulness, it'll de-escalate some of those more intense emotions, and they're less likely to report wanting to even seek retribution afterward. It's not a panacea; it won't fix everything, but it does help at least turn the dial down a little bit on the temperature of that experience, and so people are able to sort of make more intentional decisions then. And then
Right.
finally, again, just thinking about this violence equals violence, this escalation, this endless cycle of revenge. What we can try and do instead is, as often as possible, lead with compassion even when we feel we've been wronged. The whole turn the other cheek thing, right? And so it's just another thing we can try and make this world a less scary place to live if we can trust each other because we're compassionate toward one another. Like
Right.
it seems like mostly we want our species to continue. Like we keep having kids. We keep like building medical institutions to like support people medically. We
Right.
keep trying to make things safer. So like I think we want our species to keep going. So like
Seems like it.
let's also take on this psychological aspect of be kind to one another and practice compassion and forgiveness and see if we can then move toward not killing each other anymore.
Right.
That
Yeah,
seems
that would
like
be the
low-hanging
goal.
fruit.
Yeah. Seems nice enough.
All right, cool. All right, so that's I do want to end really quick on just a little personal note. I know we've gone kind of long, but you were sort of speaking about like when you were younger and you would get had someone done that to you. I used to love the idea of revenge. I loved revenge stories. I loved revenge movies. I loved the idea of getting revenge and this idea that I would get revenge on people that had wronged me, whatever that's supposed to mean. And every time I had an opportunity to get revenge and I tried, it was horrific. Like it backfired so badly. Like I might have been
Right.
successful and then I like actually injured that person in my relationship with them. And then it was like I just felt really bad afterward and I was unable to repair it.
Right.
And even little things, it was like you didn't do this thing for me when I expected it, so now I'm not going to do this thing for you when you expect it. And there's like, why would you
Right.
do that to me on purpose? Like you're a bad person. So like, and I get that. I was like, yeah, that was a pretty dick move. So
Right.
I really, it has never worked. It has just always been the wrong answer. Anytime it's ever felt like the right answer, it has been the wrong answer. So I think it's just worth considering. Like, there's just no way to fix a broken system like this. It is by its very nature, it is an unworkable, unsustainable system.
Right. Right. Exactly. It burns out really quickly and leaves everybody in the lurch.
Yeah. Okay. Great. All right. So we made it. That's everything you ever need to know about revenge. Um,
Yeah.
just kidding.
Never have to study it again.
That's right. So thank you so much for being here with us. We're gonna go ahead and recommend some things that are unrelated to revenge, as far as I know, or at least somewhat unrelated. I don't know. Mine's unrelated, but we like to recommend some things. But first, I like to do the credits. If you would like to support the show, you can join us on Patreon. If you do, you get access to all kinds of behind the scenes content. You get ad free content, early episodes. You can like talk to us and stuff. I mean, you can talk to us anyway.
Yeah.
But there's like a little community of people that are there. and it's great. So consider joining us over there. You can join for as little as like $1 a month. Technically, you can join for free. You don't get any of the benefits, but you can hang out with them, sure. But I would
Yeah.
like to otherwise thank our patrons who have been so generous with us, and that is Mike M, Megan, Mike T, Justin, Kim, Joshua, Brad, Stephanie, Olivia, Brian, Ashley, Kiara, and Michelle. Thank you all so much for your continued support.
Yes, absolutely. We love you so much.
Also, of course, thank you all for listening who are with me here today. Even if you're not a patron supporter, because that will be most of you, and I do appreciate you for listening and continuing to make this show feel a little bit relevant. And then my team of people are very necessary to have this show even happen. I'd like to thank writing and fact checking from Shane and myself, our social media
Coordinator.
coordinator is Emma Wilson, and Justin does all the audio stuff that makes it sound like a real podcast. If you'd like to reach out to us directly to tell us your thoughts on the things we're about to recommend or revenge things, maybe list some more things that we didn't list that were great revenge stories, you can email us directly at info@wwd.wwdpodcast.com, or of course you can reach out to us on the social media platforms that are not dedicated to hate speech and misinformation. We are
Yes.
on those ones. Most of them, or a few of them. I don't know. There's some of them,
Several.
the main ones, I guess, that you think of. So anyway, you can find us there. Is there anything else that you'd like to add, or anything I forgot before we get to our recommendations?
No, I think I'm good.
Okay. Revenge for talking about revenge. Let's do something different. Do some recommendations.
Yay! I love it.
I'll let you go first.
All right. So my recommendation this week, I think I've recommended this before, but I've recently revisited this series and I'm really happy about it because it's just such a delightful read. And it is a comic book series called Fables. So Fables was originally published in July, started in July of 2002. So it's like
Oh,
that
okay.
old. But the story is basically a group of fairy tale and folklore creatures have come and live. They've set up a community inside of New York. And so like all these characters are updated. They're living in modern day New York. They're dealing with it because they've been kind of kicked out of their fairy tale lands due to this character called the adversary. And I'm not going to spoil any things about that, but you discover who the adversary is, and it's a great kind of thing. But the fables are all like, it's Snow White is like the executive commissioner of Fabletown. King Cole is the mayor. Prince Charming is a real piece of shit in it. Jack of the Beanstalk folklore, he's like always trying to grift somebody, like he's always got like some new get rich quick scheme. So like the characters are all kind of like modern takes on these characters and what they would be doing if they lived in what they call the mundane world, our world, or the Mundy world. um
That's so
and
fun.
it's great. It's such a great read, and it came out on the Vertigo publisher, which does like Sandman and Preacher and like some of those stories that are kind of like more off kilter. The book is incredibly violent. It's ridiculous. Like just really fun storytelling though, because then they'll do like these kind of like one-offs where it's like, oh, how did you get to the Mundy world? And they, have Bluebeard and they have, Little Boy Blue, and they have all these they have all these characters kind of come in and play a role in different ways. So it's a fun read. It does give you a little bit of backstory on like these folklores that you might not know. It explores multicultural folklores as well, and
Hmm.
brings those characters in. At some point in time, Aladdin is there, and kind of like the original story of Aladdin is pulled in and stuff. So like, it's
Okay.
really cool, and it's just a fun read. Like I think I just have a lot of fun with it. It's not very difficult to like pick up and follow either.
Neat. All right, cool. The
Yeah.
Fables comic series.
Yes, by
Um,
Bill Willingham.
cool. All right, very good.
Yeah.
I have had to do I've had recent renovation home DIY projects, and I had the good fortune to use an orbital sander for the first time. Do you know what this is?
I have no idea. Nope.
Okay. Do you know what like a sander is? Like a sanding belt or
Yeah.
something?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. It's basically one of those, but it's a circle and it kind of spins around. It doesn't exactly spin, but it kind of wiggles around in a really fast circle. Um,
Sure.
it is maybe my favorite tool to use now. Obviously, I'm not going to try and use it to screw in a nail, but it is
Sure.
but for using it for tools that require for projects that require an orbital sander, really fun.
Okay.
Now my hands did get very tingly after holding it for several hours, sanding, but it is a really cool tool. So if you're ever in the need to sand something, particularly like a smooth surface, like you're trying to get something smooth, I mean that's how
Yeah.
all sanders kind of work. Sanders are kind of grinding down. And orbital sanders can do that too, but a lot of times you put like a really fine grit on there that's mostly for smoothing.
Yeah.
And so you can use an orbital sander, and they're pretty neat. I just used a handheld one. They're really large ones and smaller ones, but I just used a handheld orbital sander. But it was pretty cool. I was impressed. So if you ever need one, go check one out for a sanding project. Mine was we were sanding countertops to make them smooth. So
Okay. Nice. I
yeah.
like that.
Yeah. All right, cool. All right, so that's all I think all we have to say about orbital sanders. As I said, reach out to us. Info at wwd podcast dot the wwd podcast.com. And of course, leave us a rating and review. I think that was it. I think that's it. Anything else for you before I let him go?
Nope, that's all I got.
Cool. Be compassionate to each other. Don't seek
Yep,
revenge. We love you.
exactly.
This is Abraham.
And it's a shame.
We're out.
See ya. All right.
Did it.
Yay. So next week I'll definitely have Lizard Brain ready to go.
Sweet.
So we can record that.
I'm probably gonna put all my energy into writing minis. I'm gonna try to make at least three.
Okay, that works for me. I'm good with that. And then if I have time to write a mini, I'll do that too.
Cool. So we're several minis behind. We definitely need more episodes, but way behind the minis right now.
Yeah, we don't want to get behind on that since we're so far ahead.
Yeah. All right.
All right, this is episode 375, right?
Yes. I'm calling this mini porn exclamation point. That'll get their attention.
Uh-huh. Yep, that'll do it. Porn.
Maybe it should be XXX porn. XXX straight edge porn.
Of course. Yeah, exactly. That's
Yeah.
exactly what you should do. Like, why wouldn't you do that?
Little X is big X in the middle.
I love
Um,
that so much.
all right, let's turn this off for patrons. Bye, patrons.
Bye, patrons.